And hello, friends, neighbors, Romans, anybody, countrymen. Lend me your ears. Hi, I'm Tad. I will be here for approximately the next hour after I finish scratching myself. And I will be reading. Kind of unusual today. I'm going to, because we finished the Bobby Dollar book, Happy Hour in Hell, last night. And because I'm not sure what I'm going to do next in both the larger and the smaller sense of the phrase. I am going to be reading at least a chapter, maybe more, depending, from the book I'm currently working on, which I've been talking about for most of the last year at the beginning of the show, mostly to say like, I'm working on it. It's frustrating me, but I'm working on it, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I will be reading from The Splintered Sun. I don't have a whole lot else to say that I didn't say last night. It's been a week of working on The Splintered Sun mostly, refereeing the occasional dog staring match, which means kind of getting between them or distracting them, and various other things, seeing family members and friends and stuff like that. All good. No complaints. We are leaving in a couple of weeks for Denmark to go to a festival in Esbjerg. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. I believe it's Ejsberg, but that's what we're going to be doing. So not a lot to report in terms of new, hot, exciting news tonight. So I'm just going to go check in, see who might have checked in from the other end, and say hello. And then I'm probably going to start reading because, as I said, I have like a couple chapters I can read. So anyway, so let's have a look in and see who we've got so far. I see Christy Sanders. Hello, Christy. Good to see you. I see Ray Weatherford. Hello, Ray. Nice to have you with us. There's Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy. This, of course, is Jeremy Ehrman. Kelly Kenrick is here, and I am glad to see that. Who else is dropped in? After Kelly, I've got Wade Garrett, who is waving. Hi, Wade. Hi, Wade. God, I can't even talk. And I just drank a cup of coffee. Trish Laubacker. Hello, Trish. Good to see you. Medardo, un amigo especial mío. Good to see you, Medardo. And as always, Barb Ann is here. Hello, Barb Ann. Good to see you. Tracy McClatchy. Hello, hello. Pleasure. Joanna McCallum. Nice to have you with us. Emily. That's Emily Bell. A pleasure. Claudia War. Hello, Claudia. I'm glad to have you with us too. And my old friend Mark Craigbaum. And there he is. And a fine, fine gentleman he is too. So, as people are starting, I'll just... What'll I do? I will stall for just a couple of minutes before I start reading, since most regular visitors, whatever you want to call it, to these readings usually know I'm basically usually babble for like 10 minutes at the top of the hour. And so they're mostly going like, time to make a cup of tea. He's still talking about his dogs. And I don't blame them, because that is what I do a lot about. Part of that, of course, is because I hardly ever leave the house. So I'm dealing with a fairly limited number of living creatures, 4 of whom are animals. And at the best of times, except when we have company over, there's only like usually 1 or 2 other humans living in the house with me. So the animals definitely preponderate. There's no question about that. And as a result, and they're also way more demanding, I have to say, than any of the humans who live in this house, with the possible exception of me, because I am a whiny little bugger. Complain. But anyway, so I don't have a whole lot to say, and I'm just stalling, basically. I'm trying to think if there was anything else, actually, I wanted to mention, but all the stuff that peeks up at me during the week, a lot of it is politics, and as I have promised not to talk politics on this, just as a respite for everybody, as a non-partisan sort of arena where anybody who wants to can feel comfortable. Unless they hate my work. If they hate my work, it's not going to be a very comfortable, or hate me personally, it's not going to be a very comfortable sort of a hang. But barring that, I just try not to introduce anything in this particular slot. Again, as I've said, anybody who is interested in how I feel about things is always welcome to go look at my other social media, because I don't hide it. But this is for reading, and tonight it is for reading The Splintered Sun. So let me see how many people have checked in. Okay. All right. So, I see there's Tim Speckins, who I hadn't seen before. Good to see you, and ready for September, which is just around the corner. Boy, I'll tell you, is it ever? I wasn't even certain until yesterday. I couldn't remember. I was doing the old nursery rhyme in my head, trying to remember, are there 30 days in August or 31? And finally, after realizing that there was no August in the months that have 30 days, I went, oh, okay, then it's 31. And indeed, I was correct. It wasn't easy, but I got to it. So, all of that being the case, yes, September is breathing down our necks right at this very moment. So, The Splintered Sun, which is what I'm going to be reading from tonight. The basic premise behind the sprinting sun, the basic premise behind the Splintered Sun, I knew I could say all that if I just tried carefully, takes place about 300 years before the Dragonbone chair, roughly, maybe a little bit more. I'm trying to remember. So this is about the year 800, so I guess more like 350, 60 years before the Dragonbone chair, which I think starts in 1164 of the founding year 1164 in Alstenard. So this takes place about 300 years before it. You may recognize some place, those of you who have read Brothers of the Wind, which takes place even about 600 or 700 years before that, may recognize when the book comes out. There won't be much in this first part that I'm reading tonight, but when the book comes out, you will recognize certain things that carry over back to Brothers of the Wind, because the events of Brothers of the Wind were formative in a number of ways on many things, including the growing nation of Hernesteer, which is where in large part, not completely, but in large part, which is where the Splintered Sun takes place. And the other main thing is that there are references dotted throughout the books, and that goes way back to the first series, of a famous bandit by the name of, well, in the Erkenlandish versions that Simon learned and others in the Dragonbone chair, etc., he's called Jack Mundwode, which is basically Jack Wood Guardian. He is, we find out later in the more recent series, The Witchwood Crown, etc., that it comes from a character, a near mythical character named Flan, or Flan Alderwood, or Flan Kircoil. Flan Kircoil basically means Flan of the Wood. Flan Alderwood is his family name, and that his bandits are called the Crows, and Flan's Crows is a thing. So this is a bit about Flan's Crows, although we will not meet any of them in this first chapter or two. I don't think. No, we won't. So, but that is who this is mostly about, is Flan's Crows. But first we have to meet the protagonists, and we are about to meet them. So, with no further ado, and having stalled manfully for just a short time, I will start reading as soon as I can find my manuscript, which should be right here. Okay, good. So, bear with me. So this is the first chapter of The Splintered Sun, and it says, Chapter 1, King Orko Borko. The door of the wagon banged open. A small, swaying figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the courtyard's dim torchlight. Ha! A reedy voice cried. Awaken, swine, and bend your knee to your master. It is I, Orko Borko, king of the mountain trolls. What? What? Who? Hostian had managed somehow to fall asleep, despite the sweaty midsummer heat, and the shock of being awakened again so soon was clear in his groggy words. Beside him, Rufus groaned, rolled over, and pulled his cloak over his head. Heaven save us! The dwarf is drunk again. No one tells King Orko Borko when he's drunk. The small figure took a swaggering step into the wagon and immediately tangled himself in his own too long royal cape and crashed to the floor, drawing another groan from Rufus. The thing that had tripped the king of the mountain trolls was not so much a cape as a foul-scented blanket, and Orko Borko was not so much a king as a very, very small man named Beppe, who had clearly been drinking more than he should. Young Daly sat up. Like the others in the wagon, he had been having trouble getting to sleep because of the dripping mid-Anatole heat, and the dwarf's entrance had all but finished any chance of the process going well from here on. Meanwhile, Beppe was rolling around trying to free himself from the blanket, knocking over props and tools and making as much noise as an angry porpentine in a tin bucket. Oh, right. I'm so used to doing the other version where you have to hit a button to advance. I've forgotten I'm back to scrolling again. Meanwhile, Beppe was rolling around trying to free himself from the blanket, knocking over props and tools and making as much noise as an angry porpentine in a tin bucket. "You're not a troll, and you sure as cracks as burns in hell are not a king, you little shit," said Rufus. "And no one likes that character anyway. Yuval said he was taking it out of the life of St. Hadrin. Now lie down and be quiet. Some of us have work to do in the morning." Beppe had got free of the blanket, but still sat on the floor of the narrow wagon. "You left me in the tavern." His voice was ragged. "You all just left." "What are you talking about?" said Hostian. "We looked all over for you. You'd left." "I was under the table," the little man said. "With my jug," he added in a nostalgic tone, then rolled back into self-pity. "You didn't even see me. You didn't even look." "What?" demanded Rufus. "Are we supposed to crawl around on the piss-soaked floor of every alehouse we visit, in case you've gone to ground under one of the tables? Lie down and shut your mouth, you mad flea, before I give you something real to complain about." "I know you all hate me," said Beppe, and burst into tears. Daly knew better than to involve himself, but he also knew that the dwarf was not going to go to sleep until he'd either exhausted all his drunken unhappiness or one of the other players cuffed him into silence. Beppe was indeed the least popular member of Yuval's traveling troupe, but he only complained about it when he was drunk. Sober, he was quite unpleasant and demanding, liked to pick on Daly, the only person among the traveling troupe near his own size. "Where are you going, boy?" asked Hostian as Daly moved toward the door of the wagon. "Too hot," he said. Quite a substantial sentence by Daly's standards. Not yet 11 summers old, the boy seemed perfectly intelligent, but did not speak much. He did his work and was always around, but he still seemed to keep a distance from the men. The other players often likened him to the sort of silent local farmer who would stand at the back of the crowd, shaking his head and spitting on the ground during whatever entertainment the troupe was putting on, and didn't even toss a bent copper into the hat, but never left until the show was over. "Well, don't tire yourself out explaining," said Hostian loudly over Beppe's mead-soaked lament. "Just don't let Yuval catch you out of the wagon at night." Daly shrugged and slipped through the door. Beppe's sobbing was muted by the closing. They had come back to Hernus Adharc after an exhausting trip through the rest of the country. 2 wagons, 4 mules, and 6 people to do all the work. 7, including Master Yuval, although he did little more than count the money. The actors also performed all kinds of other tasks, and on many nights, when the takings were slim or non-existent, they also had to go out and beg bread and a few eggs from the local inhabitants. They set up their wagons at the outskirts of villages, in farmers' fields, and, if they were lucky, at markets during market days, their greatest source of income. Passing the hat around after a successful show at one of the market towns might bring them as much as 20 or 30 coppers and even a few silver. But markets were few and far between, especially in the dark half of the year. They would spend the rest of the summer in Hernus Adharc, the royal seat and largest city, but Yuval had been muttering for weeks about how bad the pickings had been in the rest of the country. Daly didn't care about coins or what Yuval wanted or anything except that it was too hot, and sharing a wagon with 3 others, even if one of them was small, was a miserable idea. The wagon stood in the cobbled courtyard of an inn called the Governor's Mansion. It had never actually been a governor's residence, but during the last Nabanai rule over Hernesteer, it had been the house of the official procurator, which was close enough for the people of Hernest Adharc. It now belonged to a rich Naban man that Yuval knew, and although the two wings on either side of the courtyard were full of the inn's paying guests, he had allowed Yuval and Daly's mother to use the rooms in the uppermost floor of the main house while he was away traveling in the south. The door to the bottom floor of the house, which housed the dining hall, was closed and barred this time of the night, but such things never bothered Daly. He climbed up the outside wall and into the second-floor window. The inn's owner let his more favored guests use that room for gambling and other amusements, but Daly, who only wanted a cooler place to sleep than the wagon, could see nothing suitable to lie on except a table. He knew without asking that Yuval would lose his temper if he found Daly there. He was wondering whether he should retreat to the bottom floor when he heard his mother's voice echoing down the stairwell. "No! Don't you cozen me, Yuval. I'm no fool." Daly lingered at the base of the stairs, listening. His mother sounded truly angry. He didn't like that, but he despised the man she had taken up with and often hoped she would tire of him and they could leave the traveling show. "Now, Ardis, don't take on so. You have it all wrong. Come and give me a kiss." That was Yuval, with his deep showman's voice that sounded so impressive until it was revealed that, like the Naban man himself, it was nothing but air and bluster. "I will be back before you know it. Don't lie to me. I'm not a fool." His mother was definitely upset, and that made Daly uncomfortable, but an idea had floated up in his mind like a bubble in a pond. The roof will be cool. And suddenly the idea of having nothing above him but sky pulled at him in the same sweet way his mother used to lift him from his bed when he was small. He could not go up the stairs, though. They might hear him, and Yuval would have a fit. He hated what he called Daly's sneaking around, and in the middle of the night it would be worse. But he had come in through the window and could go out the same way. He didn't want to hear any more of their argument. It hurt him in his stomach when his mother was unhappy, and there had been more and more of that in the last weeks as they finished their tour of the outer counties. "So you're going to stand there and lie to my face," Daly heard his mother saying as he slid out of the window, searched for handholds on the wall outside, then began to make his way up past the upper floor, headed for the roof. The sound of their voices, especially his mother's, angry but also frightened, was painful. He just wanted to find somewhere cool and quiet. He just wanted to climb. If he could only get high enough. At last he scrabbled up onto the wide, slanted roof. The sounds of the argument had all but ended. He was aware only of a low, urgent buzz of conversation from below, and as he crawled out across the tiles, he found he could ignore it and simply enjoy the refreshing breeze that flirted through the chimneys, as if pleased by his arrival. Daly lay back and stared up at the stars, dim behind the river haze, but still doing their best to shine through. He watched them in their slow wheel, glad to have something else to look at beside the darkness of the wagon, and fell into a kind of waking drowse, out of which he was startled some indeterminate time later by the sudden intrusion of his mother's argument with Yuvalis. For a moment he was utterly confused. Had they climbed up onto the roof to search for him, yammering and scolding all the while? But when he rolled over, there was no sign of them, only the voices drifting up from below. "I told you," his mother said. "I know! So don't try to tell me more lies." "Ardis, what do you mean?" Yuval was close to losing his temper. Daly knew that rough edge in his voice and what came next. This is all something you imagined in a dream." "Curse you and all your kin," she cried. "Hostian told me. He told me about your wife back in Naban." For a long moment they both fell silent, as if they had stepped together over some significant boundary, forded a river, or stumbled into a royal forest preserve. "Hostian told you that. Yes, but he only told me what I had already heard from others. I know, Uvalis, and I know that your talk of coming back next year is nothing but a lie. You're going back to Naban, back to your wife. And what about me? I thought I was your woman, but I was only a convenience. Their voices were rising from the front of the inn. Daly climbed down toward the edge of the roof as quietly as he could manage, wincing each time the tiles squeaked or shifted beneath him, though his mother and Yuval were making enough noise that there was almost no chance they would hear him. As he neared the edge, head downward and carefully braced against a possibly fatal slide from the night-dampened tiles, he realized that the master of the traveling show and his mother had come out onto the balcony outside the top-floor room, a balcony that hung some 20 cubits above the cobbled courtyard. Daly's heart was beating fast. He had never heard his mother so angry, not even when she had demanded he never ask her again about his real father. He was not fearful of his mother leaving Uvalis. He had long since come to despise the big man and the increasingly cold disinterest with which he treated Daly's mother, but his insides were squirming at the sound of his mother's desperation. Why did she care about that fat liar? She and Daly had been fine together. They would be fine together again. He wouldn't miss the traveling show at all, and neither would she. Things hadn't been right for weeks. Go ahead! Go back to Naban! She cried, loud enough that the inn's guests must be waking up and wondering what was happening so far above their heads. But I will shout your crimes to the world! Liar! Cozener! For the love of heaven, woman, shut your mouth! Yuval sounded quieter than Daly would have guessed. Quiet but dangerous. Daly wanted to do something to distract them, but couldn't at first think of anything. He decided he would throw down a few roof tiles to smash on the cobbles, hoping it would startle Yuval and his mother out of their argument. He tried to pry up one of the slates beside him, but they were all firmly nailed to the roof deck underneath. He clambered upward, pulling at the slates until he found one he could work loose. But even as he tried to free it, he heard his mother cry out again, "Take your hands off me! I won't be silenced!" Then there was a horrible splintering crunch, a whistling shriek of surprise, and a low sudden grunt or shock or effort that must have been Uvalis, followed by silence. For a moment, Daly could not swallow, could not breathe, could not move. Then, his head entirely empty but for the memory of that thin, fading shriek, he slid back down to the edge of the roof and peered over. Yuval was crouched at the edge of the balcony, a half-dozen fathoms below, but Daly could only see the back of the man's dark-haired head. I think that half-dozen fathoms part is wrong. I'll have to fix that. Again, this is first draft, folks. Yuval was crouched at the edge of the balcony, but Daly could only see the back of the man's dark-haired head. The balcony railing had broken away, part of it still hanging in the air, held only by the splintered remains of a few posts, as if it had been destroyed by a single savage kick. Much farther below, splayed unnaturally on the courtyard cobbles like a discarded doll, lay Daly's mother, Ardis. The emptiness inside him seemed to push all thought from his head. As he scrambled down from the roof in a tenth of the time it had taken him to climb there, he could think of nothing but the sight of his mother lying broken on the stones. When he reached the ground, he ran around the side of the main building and out to the front. Daly flung himself down beside her, but the one part of his thoughts that could still make some kind of sense knew that it was too late. She was face down, and one of her legs was bent impossibly beneath her. Both her arms were flung outward as though she had tried to save herself, but the horrifying angle they made and the spreading pool of blood around her hair and upper body showed how completely she had failed. Her left hand stretched toward where Daly kneeled, her ring with its red gemstone still on her finger, as it always was. He reached out, but the hand was shattered and limp, like something that had been crushed by a wood maul, and he jerked his fingers away again. It can't be, his only thought, over and over. It can't be. Afterward, he didn't remember much of what happened. He could recall reaching for his mother's cooling hand again and feeling the terrible loose way her arm moved, as if it might come loose if he pulled it. He thought he remembered people rushing out of the inn, hurrying toward the place where his mother, where the flattened, nearly shapeless thing that had been his kind, confused mother lay. The next memory was hearing Yuval's voice as he burst from the front door. He must have run down the stairs to get there so quickly. "Oh, God's mercy, Ardis!" the bearded man cried. "The railing broke! Oh, my God!" A part of Daly wanted to throw himself at Yuval's throat, to throttle the life out of the murdering monster, to scratch his ugly face bloody, bite him, and rip at him until Yuval was dead. But even in his wretchedness, he knew he would be no more than an annoyance to the big-bellied, broad-chested Naban man. Everything seemed utterly mad. The world had turned upside down. The past was gone, and he couldn't imagine such a thing as a future. He felt as if the top of his head would come off like the lid on an overboiling pot. Even the stars above the courtyard seemed to mock him now, standing back like cruel bystanders, watching but not caring. Then he was running in darkness across echoing stone. That was all he could remember from the instant he heard Yuval's voice until he came back to himself. He slid to a halt just outside the front entrance of the inn yard, panting and crying, bathed in the seemingly pointless light of the single torch that burned in a sconce beside the door to welcome late travelers. Light. Fire. Daly never knew afterward how he reached the torch to take it down from the wall bracket. All he could remember was running along the night-emptied street to the back entrance of the courtyard with the torch in his hand. Flame bent almost sideways, then scrambling over the gate and from there across the cobbles to Yuval's 2 wagons. The first wagon was full of folded canvas flats painted with grass and sky for outdoor scenes, or stone walls that could pass for royal halls or deep dungeons. Daly leaned in just long enough to set flame to the wagon's contents, which quickly started to burn. Then he hurried to the second, the same wagon he had quit less than an hour earlier, and kicked open the door. "What in the name of the saints is going on out there?" demanded Rufus, staring at Daly. In the glare of the torchlight, the man's face was pale, wide-eyed. Daly hesitated, though for a brief instant he was more than willing to set the whole world on fire, including any people foolish enough to be in it. Instead, he said, "Out?" Hostian was struggling to sit up, tangled in some of the props and tools with which they all shared the wagon. "What is it? Daly, is that you?" "Out!" the boy shouted, then shoved his torch into a pile of coiled ropes, which began to burn. Rufus tried to grab his arm, but Daly was beyond reason now and forced the actor back with the blazing brand, coincidentally setting the man's shirt on fire. Rufus squealed in pain, then shoved past Daly and out of the wagon, shrieking curses as he struggled to yank off his burning shirt. Hostian hurried out of the wagon after him. "You're mad!" he shouted back at Daly. "You'll hang for this!" Daly dragged the torch across a pile of costumes until he saw the flames take root, then dropped the torch on top and retreated to the door of the wagon. The fire was burning swiftly now, and the wagon's ribbed canvas top had caught. In only a few more moments, the entire thing would be ablaze, but even with the heat now strong enough to hurt his skin, Daly felt icy cold in his middle, empty, dead. As he was climbing down the steps, much easier to see now that both wagons were on fire, he heard a surprising noise from inside the wagon behind him. "God help me!" It was a scream of raw terror, and Daly instantly knew who it was. Hostian and Rufus had fled the wagon, but they had forgotten Beppe, the drunken dwarf, sleeping in his little niche, and Beppe had awakened to find himself surrounded by leaping flames. Daly stood for a long moment. Every heartbeat he remained increased the likelihood that he would be caught, and Hostian's threat would become fact. A part of him didn't care if they did hang him. He couldn't imagine his life going on after this. And another part of him thought that foul-mouthed, bad-tempered little Beppe deserved it. But something kept him from escaping. The people gathered around his mother's body had now seen the fires, and were running across the broad courtyard toward the flames. Daly, still as hollow as an emptied eggshell, climbed back into the sleeping wagon. The interior was full of smoke, and within moments he was coughing and nearly blind. But after all the sleepless nights listening to Beppe's loud snoring, Daly knew exactly where the small man must be. Maddened with terror, the dwarf fought him. Daly got several scratches on his face and hands, but managed to drag the wheezing, thrashing figure out of the wagon and dump him onto the cobbles. Then he sprinted off into the darkness as Beppe lay, choking, gasping, and demanding in widely separated bursts of querulous rage just what had happened and why wasn't anyone doing anything about it. Daly had no idea of where to run and barely even realized he was running. He scrambled back over the gate, lost his grip, and fell heavily to the ground, then got up and plunged into the darkness of the Salt Hill district. Candles were being lit as the shouts from the governor's house courtyard finally pulled people out of their beds, so Daly turned sharply toward the River Cumney, then just ran and ran, weeping hard now so that he could barely see, until he reached a high stone bridge. He ducked under it, then squelched upriver along the muddy bank until he had found a broad stand of reeds and threw himself down there. His heart began to slow. He hurt all over and had what must be burns in several places, but inside he still felt as hard and cold as a stony mountain peak. He angrily wiped away his tears, pushed himself deep into the crackling reeds, and soon fell into exhausted, twitching sleep. Chapter 2. Salt Hill to Garner House Quay. "Come along, girl," said the owner of the house. "Don't stand in the doorway or someone will trample you. Whew, everybody's in and out today." The woman who had introduced herself as Mistress Pegeen looked Vedra over, as if the girl was something she had bought, which, in a way, she was. "You are younger than I expected, and more brown, too." "I am from Harcha, my lady." Vedra did her best to keep her voice soft and respectful. "We are darker skinned than northern folk." Of course. And I meant no harm. You're a lovely shade." Pegeen gave her a distracted smile. "Follow me." Vedra had never been in such a huge hall. It stretched so far above her head that she almost expected to hear owls hooting in the rafters, as they had in the high nighttime branches of her southern island village. There were windows, of course, but they were so far up the walls, Vedra wondered if the light ever touched the floor. She had never been in a house so big, and she could only stare around her, shocked to find herself in a hall that was almost as big as her entire fishing village back in Harcha. The mistress of the house glanced at her sharply. "You look as if you disapprove of the place, child." "Oh, no, my lady. How could I? I have never been in a house so big and so beautiful. I am overwhelmed." Pegeen's expression softened. "Oh, that's well then. Some of the neighbors have called it gaudy and unnecessarily grand. Can you imagine such a thing?" Vedra had only spent a year cultivating important, powerful, and rich people, but she had learned her lessons early. "No, my lady, I cannot. They must be jealous." The woman nodded her head energetically. "Yes, that's it. That's it exactly. Jealous." After a long moment, Pegeen nodded again, gazed suddenly far away, perhaps recalling some past insult that still troubled her. "My husband should have been ennobled long ago. He always supported King Teftain. He supplied the king's armies on several occasions during the war against Naban, sometimes out of his own purse. It is only the pettiness of certain of the nobles that has held us back. Pegeen forced herself to make a cheerful face. But no matter. We all do what we can to serve His Majesty. But King Techtane hasn't even visited his own country for years, thought Phaedra. Just shows how strong his grip on power still is, I suppose, or at least on people's memories. Phaedra did not care much about who wielded power in Hernus Adharc, but was being forced to learn because she had discovered it was much, much better to ply her trade for rich nobles than for her poor neighbors in Garner House Quay, one of the capital's least stylish neighborhoods, a place of mostly empty tenements and neglected storehouses. Mistress Pegeen had hurried off to see why the minstrels had not arrived, leaving Phaedra to sit in a corner of the gigantic space where she would be out of the way and try to imagine what would be asked of her. Most scryers had to earn their bread as petty fortune-tellers, and though the tools of the craft were fairly basic, gleed or glass, pool or pyre, as the old saying had it, often they didn't work. Even Phaedra needed to improvise sometimes when her gift did not manifest itself. She looked around. Pegeen and her friends were clearly much wealthier than the clients Phaedra usually served, so she was more than a little worried. She had the dubious luck of having a true talent for scrying, although it was a hit or miss thing, and even some of her most powerful visions were hard to put into words, let alone shape into the kind of fortunes that rich and powerful Hernestiri nobles wanted to hear. "Well, there you are, child," said Mistress Pegeen some time later. "Did you get something to eat?" "Yes, my lady." She had, in fact, dined well after not having had much to eat for the previous 2 days. She wished she could stay on in this huge, warm hall and be fed so well every day. "It was very good." Something in her tone caught the older woman's attention. Instead of replying, she studied Phaedra for a moment. "You could use to be plumped up a little," she finally said. "You're a pretty enough girl, but you're dreadfully thin. Are you ready?" Caught by surprise, for a moment she thought Pegeen meant to start fattening her on the moment, Phaedra finally realized what the mistress of the house had meant. "Oh, yes, I'm ready. Do you have your whatever it is you use?" Phaedra shook her head. "I do not have any scrying tools of my own, mistress. I find that the dreams, the visions, come best when I use something of yours, my lady, if that is permitted. Do you have a particular jewel you treasure?" Pegeen stared, and Phaedra guessed what she was thinking. Hand an expensive gem to a poor girl? Or a looking-glass, she added quickly. "Those work very well, too." "Ah," Pegeen nodded. "Yes, we have a very fine mirror, made by the best glass house on Riza." She paused again. "Is that where you're from, child?" "Not precisely, my lady." All the southern islands were much the same to the Hernestiri, but Phaedra could still hear her mother's voice telling her never to be ashamed of where she was from. I come from another island, Harcha." "Do you really?" Even as she spoke to Phaedra, Pegeen was looking around at her other guests, making a social calculation. "So far. This must all be very strange to you." "I've lived in Hernus Adharc several years, my lady." Good. Mistress Pegeen had made her decision. It was time for the entertainment to begin. "Come along, then, and see our lovely looking-glass. It's quite large." As soon as she saw the mirror, Phaedra knew she was going to have trouble. 2 servants were needed to lift the great rectangle off its stand, and when one stepped away, the other could barely hold it by himself. The guests were already starting to gather by the fire, and even as Phaedra worried over how she would manipulate something so wide and so heavy, Lady Pegeen was leading her into the center of the gathering. Phaedra felt a moment of shame at how she must look to these comfortable folk with her faded, off-mended dress, her bare head, and her tangled black hair that had never been touched by any lady's maid or other trained hands. After several failed attempts to hold the mirror, it was finally determined that the only way Phaedra, small even for her 14 years, could use it was to lie the glass on its back on a table, as Mistress Pegin's guests watched. Most of those who had gathered to see what Phaedra would do were women, although a few curious men had wandered over as well, including Pegin's husband, Alderman Navan, a stout, cheerful-looking fellow dressed in a beautiful overtunic of fine wool, just a little tight around the middle. Some of the guests clearly were waiting for this small amusement to be over, but others paid no attention whatsoever, chattering away without even lowering their voices. Phaedra looked down at the highly polished tin surface through the greenish glass that covered it, and for a moment thought that everything would be easy. Then she realized that the smears and streaks hovering before her eyes were not the first traces of the dream place, but only flaws in the mirror, and for a moment she despaired. Mistress Pegeen had introduced her as this sweet young maiden, and some of the kinder guests, and some of the Mistress Pegeen had introduced her as this sweet young maiden, and some of the kinder guests had quieted and turned their attention to her. Phaedra was daunted by the sudden idea that this might prove a turning point for her journey, either a hopeful way forward or a slammed gate if things went wrong, but she tried to push such thoughts from her mind. She had eaten well here at Pegeen's house and would remember it fondly when she made her way back to her cold, empty room. She had also been promised 3 copper pennies no matter how the scrying went. How could she complain? But no matter how Phaedra tried to clear her thoughts and find her way through the shining surface into the mirror's depth, the knack eluded her. Desperately, she tried to empty her thoughts of everything except the invisible, inaudible traces that would lead her to what she sought. But nothing worked. The hum of conversation, which had died out when she began to lean over the mirror, now began to rise again, and she could hear quiet laughter. A tiny drop of perspiration fell from her nose and splashed delicately on the mirror's surface. That made it even harder to find the depths, as now she felt that everybody in the hall must be looking at the fallen droplet. "Is it too warm for you, dear?" asked Mistress Pegeen kindly. "We can move farther back from the fire." "No, thank you." It was hard to make her voice work. Phaedra's throat felt as tight as a wrung-out garment. I need the light." "Then you must pray to our beloved Mirka to cool you," said the mistress of the house, then added, "Perhaps a cooling drink, too." "No," Phaedra said, then regretted the abruptness of her reply. She glared down at the mirror surface, then realized that she had utterly lost whatever composure she had when she began. After another aching stretch of time, she finally straightened up. I am truly sorry, my lady. I cannot see anything." She heard another louder wave of laughter, or thought she did. "Is there anything else we could use instead?" "I have a ring with a fine crystal in it," said a woman. "It must belong to Lady Pegeen, or her family," Phaedra told her. She was beginning to feel very anxious now, a few moments from utter humiliation. It could be a coal from the fire? I have used those before." But the fire had just been heaped with new wood, and that which had already burned was powdery ash. "Your funny little black glass, Peg," said one of the other noble women. "I suppose that might do," said the lady of the house, though she seemed to be growing a little regretful about the failed entertainment. "Can you use that, child?" she asked. "It's just a small one. My grandmother used to call it a dragon glass, but I don't think it had anything to do with dragons at all." Phaedra had no idea, but she was desperate to escape the growing sense of failure and humiliation. Several of the women and at least 2 of the men had got up from their fireside seats already and were making their way toward the mead bowl. Yes, please, my lady. Mistress Pegeen sent one of her ladies to the residence to find it. As they waited, the mistress of the hall went over to a shrine at one end of the great hall and lit a small candle, then prayed briefly. And Vedra had the sudden feeling that she was not the only anxious one. But what could possibly worry a woman like Pegeen? She was neither beautiful nor young, but she had an important husband in what must be one of the grandest houses in all Hernizadhark, and she was surrounded by friends who wore golden jewelry and impossibly costly outfits. Some moments later, when Pegeen had received the seeing glass, she beckoned Vedra back to the fire. As she took the oval mirror, Vedra was startled by how comfortable it felt in her hand. The mirror and frame had been carved from a single chunk of shiny black stone, with a carved border of roughly hewn vines and berries, but the central round had been buffed and polished to a high gloss. Vedra looked at her own reflection, at her straight and unkempt hair, her round face a full shade darker than even the most sunburned of the guests, and her despair returned. She didn't belong here, didn't belong in Hernistir at all. Vedra was an island girl, and no matter how she despised her own family, it was becoming clearer every day that she belonged back on Harsha, not begging for scraps from rich northerners. Her scrying talent, what was it but a sort of madness that came and went? She had been right about one well-to-do client giving birth to a male heir, which was probably how Pegeen had heard of her, but far more often she had been unable to discern anything and had left only vague, hard-to-disprove fortunes in her wake. She was no more a proper scryer than a 6 days in every se'nnight sinner could be a priest. But the smooth, warm feel of the black mirror gave her a little courage, though she could not have said why. She closed her eyes for a moment, swallowed until she could speak easily, and then said, "I think I am ready to try again, my lady." "No harm in trying," said one of the men, and several of the women tittered. Vedra carefully did not look at them. Back near the great fireplace, wide as a farm wagon and taller than Vedra, she sat down on a bench and clutched the mirror in one hand, then lifted it toward her face and opened her eyes. To her surprise, as she did so, Mistress Pegeen took Vedra's free hand in her own, like a sister or a mother, and whispered, "Pray to Mircha, child. Pray to Mircha for her help." And she did, as she stared down at the shining black surface. Vedra had been raised on the gods of the southern islands, old gods, little interested in the affairs of mortals, and was not even sure she believed in them. She knew even less of Mircha, only that she was the daughter of the sky god and mistress of the rain, and was also a particular favorite of Hernistiri women. If the goddess was a particular favorite of Pegeen's, it would not hurt to try. "Oh, holy Mircha, daughter of the sky," Vedra silently prayed. "I am not one of your children, but kind Mistress Pegeen said I should pray to you. Please do what you can to let me see what comes. If not for me, then for her, because I think she is a good person. Help me to see something that will be of use to her. I am Vedra of Harsha, and if you grant this wish, I will venerate you and sacrifice to you." She opened her eyes, but did not look at Pegeen or anything else, only the polished surface of the mirror, glossy black, with moving ripples of reflected firelight. She let her gaze drift in and out until a pattern of reflection caught her attention. As she tried to make sense of it, she felt the room around her begin to dim. Then she was moving, not falling this time, but drifting into a blackness shot with spatters of light. The light gradually grew and took on shapes. She saw the outlines of a tall tower with curiously shaped windows, six-sided, not square. It stood against a sky full of swirling dark clouds, as if a storm had gathered, but rain had not yet begun to fall. At the base of the tower stood a figure in a fine traveling cloak, one she thought she recognized, but in her confusion could not name. But so familiar. And then a tiny shape that had been blowing around the top of the tower, and which Vedra had taken for a leaf, suddenly flattened out into a winged shape and began a steep descent toward the figure at the base of the tower. As the winged shape hurtled down, the human figure staggered aside. The winged thing whisked past it, then suddenly bent its angle of flight and seemed to fly directly at Vedra. She saw the black silhouette of scalloped wings, a bat, and then the thing hung in front of her, seemingly only inches away. It spread its wings, flapping wildly, and she saw a fierce little face, small sharp teeth, and red eyes. Then it flew straight at her again. She tried to scream, but could not, could only fling herself backward, desperate to escape its fangs and flapping, claw-tipped wings. Vedra woke suddenly in a place she had never seen before. It was a bedchamber with a large four-posted canopied bed, but she herself was lying on a small couch against one wall. The chamber was dark except for a single candle in a wall niche. As she struggled to sit up, she saw that someone had set a cloth beneath her shamefully dirty shoes. "Where? You're awake. Oh, the gods are good," said Mistress Pegeen from the doorway. "Our good lady of the clouds has brought you back to us. Child, you gave me a terrible fright, shouting and screaming and then fainting dead away. You were lucky you did not split open your head." But Pegeen sounded more annoyed than frightened, and though she waved for one of the servants to bring Vedra water to drink, Pegeen herself lingered in the doorway. "What happened to you?" Vedra shook her head. "I don't know. I saw something. It startled me." "Tell me, child." She described the brief vision, the tower, the figure, the terrifying bat. The noble woman's face did not change as Vedra talked, but she left the doorway to better hear the tale. When Vedra had finished, Mistress Pegeen fixed her with a stern look. "Do you swear, girl, hand to heaven, that you did not study or spy upon our family before you came here?" Vedra sat up straight, though her aching head did not approve of the sudden movement. "What do you mean, my lady? Of course I did not spy on you." Pegeen's solemn stare did not change. "And you did not ask around about our family? About my husband and me?" "Only for directions to your house when you sent me your invitation. I do not know Salt Hill well. But other than that, no, my lady, I swear." The merchant's wife held the girl's eye for another long moment, then shook her head. "Then perhaps there truly is something to your vision. If it means anything to you, please tell me, mistress. It meant nothing to me, though the flying creature scared me." "I do not know about that part. A bat, you say. But the tower sounds much like the old temple tower on our country estate at Launi. I know of no other that has windows like that. Before it was ruined, it was a temple to the two Mirkas." Now she leaned toward Vedra. "Did you pray to Mirka, as I suggested?" Vedra hadn't even known there was more than one Mirka. "I did my best, lady." Pegeen stood up. Smaller and stouter than her husband, she looked like someone who might be selling fish in a riverside marketplace. But Vedra thought she had seen something much deeper in this woman's looks, both wit and caution beyond the ordinary. "I will have to talk to my husband about this. He plans a trip to Launi soon. As for you, child, I am glad you took no serious harm. I will pay you for your time, of course. My neighbors seem to think you fainting was a jest of sorts, either yours or mine." She frowned. "Probably it is best to leave things that way. I will have one of my men escort you home." "That isn't necessary, my lady." "Nonsense! You have been asleep since the first evening bell, and it's late. I would not send a young girl across the city by herself at night. Now gather up anything you brought with you, and I will see to finding your payment." The silent, torch-carrying servant. By the way, I'm going to finish this chapter. We may go a couple of minutes past the top. The silent, torch-carrying servant dutifully walked beside Vedra from the house on Salt Hill all the way to the temple bridge, and did not speak even when Vedra spoke to him. She wondered if he was deaf or mute, and only discovered the answer after they had crossed the river Kumni. As they reached the far side of the bridge, Vedra said, "I should go on alone from here. My house is close by, in West Key, but my landlord has a dog who will bark if he smells someone he doesn't know. In fact, some nights he runs loose, protecting the property. He is a very big dog." The servant stopped, which seemed to suggest that he could hear, but he still did not speak. After Vedra said it all again, he gave a very mild bow, turned, and carried his torch back across the bridge they had just descended. The return of darkness did not bother Vedra too much. Alone now, as she had wanted, she cut directly through the street she had pointed out, wondering whether the gods of either her island home or Hernastir would be angry at her for the small falsehood. The last thing Vedra wanted was for a rich potential patron to see how she actually lived. Within moments she had left the West Key behind and was approaching the Garner House district, an even poorer part of Hernus-Adharc, which had once served the tax agents at the river gate, but had long since been outstripped in importance by other wealthier neighborhoods along the western keys. The streets of Garner House, some cobbled, many nothing more than dried mud, were largely deserted at night, and for good reason. Here the threat of dogs running loose was no face-saving tale, but a dark fact, and men hunted here too, both singly and in packs, predators more dangerous than any canines. Vedra hurried on through the familiar streets, happy to be protected by darkness. The waning crescent moon cast just enough light for her to see, and a torch would only draw attention, both from the legitimate guardians of the few working warehouses and shipyards in the district, and from other more dangerous folk. She hurried from shadow to shadow, relying on her dark, tattered cloak to make her inconspicuous, until at last she found the narrow street she wanted and made her way down the slope to the last warehouse by the river's edge. The rush and murmur of the Kumni had quieted since the last of the spring's meltwater had made its way down from the hills, but it was still loud here. The river's brackish smell suffused every breath, but the faltering neighborhood still felt more like home to her than any place since her parents had sold her. She reached her building, a square two-story wooden shell, at least a century past its best days, then made her way through the door with the broken lock, which she had hung in such a way that its uselessness was not immediately visible, and made her way across the warehouse, following the route that she had carefully memorized to avoid making noise. It was not easy to do, even after months of practice, because the whole of the old warehouse's bottom floor was covered with the shattered remains of old storage jars, huge things that must have been almost as tall as Vedra herself. Either some earthshake in the past had destroyed an entire inventory, or angry hands had worked long and hard to break the jars. Either way, they had been left to lie there, the only obvious sign remaining of what must once have been a thriving enterprise. When she reached the stairs without kicking any of the broken pots, she let out a breath of relief. The building itself was empty, and had been ever since Vedra had found it, but several of the nearby warehouses were still going concerns, and some of them were guarded both night and day. She didn't want any of the guards, or any of the area's less savory denizens, wondering why someone would be walking around in a deserted place. At the top of the stairs, now in near absolute darkness, Vedra fumbled until she found her precious lantern. Once she had lit a taper with her flint and iron, she lit the candle inside the hexagon of horn windows, then lowered the lantern's hood so that light leaked out only from one small section, making it less likely anyone nearby would spot her presence on the upper floor. Her first glimpses around the wide, high room suggested that nothing had changed since she left. Her thin pallet still lay on the floor near a windowless inner wall, and her meager collection of clothes were still piled on a small bench beside it. She had found that bench in the wreckage on the bottom floor, and although it did not stand up very well by itself, creative arrangement of her clothing kept it upright. She set down Mistress Pegine's coppers, which she had clutched in a sweaty hand all the way back from Salt Hill, atop the pile. Despite all the signs of her hiding hole having remained undiscovered in her absence, Phaedra still could not shake a feeling of strangeness, like a forest animal catching the first faint whiff of wildfire smoke. She tried to tell herself that it was only because of what had happened that evening, her troubling vision of some kind of bat or winged spirit, but she still walked all around the wide room, letting the limited glow of the hooded lantern fall onto each corner in turn until she felt reassured that she was alone. She was on her way back to her pallet, footsore and anxious for sleep after her long walk, when something creaked high above her. Startled, heart suddenly racing, she lifted the lantern and tilted it back until its faint light washed across the heavy beam that ran the length of the building to hold up the angled rafters. An unexpected shape, a clump of shadow, was attached to the center of the beam, twice her own height above the trembling lantern. Phaedra had only a moment to wonder what it could be, trying to make sense of this new and inexplicable shape. Then she saw a pale, small face in the middle of the clump. A moment later, it opened its eyes, and Phaedra let out a terrified, strangled cry and dropped her lantern. And that's the end of chapter 2. So let me just close this up. I could see as I was going, there's a couple of more words that will have to be fixed. Anyway, so with all of that, we have now gone past the top of the hour, so I'm going to wrap it up. Normally, I would love to hang on and hear what anybody had to say, but I will put that off for another time. I hope you enjoyed that, or at least were suitably entertained for a short period of time. I will be back very, very soon. I don't know what's going to happen next week, so watch this space, Facebook or whatever, and I will let you know if I'm going to be doing a reading next week. And in the meantime, feel free to make suggestions about what, if anything, I might read. And yeah, so that's that. So anyway, with that, I say thank you for joining me. As always, it is a great pleasure to talk at you and to get feedback from you and to spend time with you. And there is a whole pile of prepositions for you to do with as you will. Until we meet again, please take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones, your close friends, all of those. Keep an eye out for others you might not know so well, but who might benefit from a moment of kindness of virtually any kind. And yeah, that about wraps it up. So thank you for joining me as always, and I will see you very soon. Peace and be well. Ciao, bambini.